Over the last few years, the significance of writing in video games rose from just telling the player where to go to telling vast stories with various characters. This made it so game stories are bigger than ever before, and even though many eyes are on game stories nowadays, not enough people look at the profession of games writer. The lack of light shine on the job begs the question, how do you write for games? To do that, we best start by learning a bit about both writing in general and then how it is specifically done in some games, and then we can try writing a bit on our own to get a better feeling for it. Since teaching writing is a topic that fills entire books, I would advise you to, read these books. Due to the importance of dialogue in modern games, I would say there's no better place to look at than Robert McKee's book Dialogue, The Art of Verbal Action for Page, Stage and Screen, that he published in 2016. McKee is a highly acclaimed teacher for writing, and while he focuses more on movies and screenplays, his lessons should be more than palpable for our goal. And this book is a monster when it comes to information, and therefore if you want to just do game writing and not learn more about it, you can just look at chapter 2 and 3 and ignore most of the rest. However, I would still advise each and every one of you who is interested in writing to check out his book and give it a read. He's an amazing teacher, and I learned a lot from him. To actually learn more about writing in games, we first need to look at games that are acclaimed for their story and implementation of writing. A good game series for that, where we easily could create some text for, is Fire Emblem. To better understand how they implement this topic, let's look at one of their entries with the most popular characters and themes. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance was the 9th installment of the Fire Emblem series and came out in 2005. In this game, the protagonist Ike goes on a big adventure through the continent of Talos, trying to overthrow the king of the nation, Ashnard. To do this, he assembles an army which he does his journey with. This GameCube game features writing in various ways, like in its story and the support conversations, and while you could argue that its lack of voice acting in general age is not state of the art anymore, I would say that this franchise is a good pivot to experience the possibilities of game writing. So for the project of writing ourselves, I decided on writing a Fire Emblem support, or a few Fire Emblem supports, because I think those are the best for the start of your writing career. To get a better grasp of the content of support conversations, the easiest approach would be to look at already existing analysis of Fire Emblem supports, which luckily have been done plenty already by the YouTuber Fairgast in a YouTube series Support Science. In this ongoing video series, he dissects various Fire Emblem supports from some of the franchise's favorite characters, or he showcases some of his personal favorites, or some he finds pretty interesting. You can watch the entire series on YouTube, and while he never really teaches how to write one yourself, he always dissects the structure of them, and it's a good way of learning how to write them yourself. Now that we have everything ready to start, we can finally get into writing. But wait. Since we want to do this as industry-oriented as possible, one question arises: how do they turn in their writings in the game industry? Sadly enough, there isn't a given formatting like there is with movie scripts, so I asked around to see if anyone from the industry would be down to answer a few of my questions, and thanks to the help of Katie L. Mallon and Sina Gorski, I've been able to find out how game writing is done in the industry, and wow, I expected this to be clearer. To give you the short form, basically every studio does it in their own way, since game writing is needed for various parts of the game and the dialogue needs to be presented differently than a tooltip, for example. Based on my talks with these two, however, I've been able to deduce that giving each support conversation its own Excel sheet would be the most industry-oriented way of doing things, since that is how we would be best able to split it into different text boxes and show the corresponding character's emotion. And now we are set to go write our own supports, and this is how I did mine. So since we've cleared everything up, it's time for me to show you how I did my preparations and wrote my scripts and Fire Emblem supports. First of all, you have to decide on a character. I've already chosen Vika, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, and as I said, it's first of time to do research about her. There are a bunch of ways to research characters. One of the easiest would be to just Google Vika Fire Emblem character analysis and find stuff around her. I think discussions are always a good idea to learn stuff about characters. Another way of doing that would be to, well, play the games and analyze them yourself, obviously. So since I can't just go through like the 40-hour JRPG, there are always sites where you can just look at all the texts. For Fire Emblem, it's Reed's Forest. 217? Yeah. So here, for example, you would see stuff where she herself is talking or being talked to, and you can learn stuff about her. There are two important things for every character that you need to find out. Those are personality, and speaking habits, tendencies, all that stuff. Speaking habits are important when you yourself write the script, and you need to find out what words that person is using. So for example, you see here Rika is talking, hey, so are we gonna help them, or should we just stay here and twiddle our thumbs? She's sarcastic at times. She calls Tomat boss, right as this moment where Tomat is like, hey, come on Vika. She's like, hey boss, wait a second. Also that she's saying I'll instead of I will. Also important little clues that are important writing and stuff. So you can already write them down, like calls from Tomat boss. Or like here uses I'll. So when it comes like to a moment where you yourself are writing something with first saying I will, you will, you are, you know the right one to use. Those are like little things that if you pick up on them and see them are very helpful. You don't find any sources, you just have to assume her speaking habits based on the personality of a character. Right, how you can see here, or when Mikaya approaches, she's like meep and talks about it. We can write down uncomfortable around branded. That was something that was revealed in the story. I've played the game, so obviously I know a bunch of stuff, so I will fill it out over the next few minutes, and then I'll show you stuff that I found, stuff that might be important. Obviously not everything you will write down will be important, but in German we have a saying, haben ist besser als brauchen, which we roughly translate to having is better than needing. So, I don't know, picking up something like that she uses I'll or calls him boss, even when you don't have her talking to the character she's calling boss, will be important. If it could be important, and if next time you would also write something with her, you would have the information already written down. Like the little characterization is very nice to do, and the more you do now, the less you have to do later, because there's nothing that's worse than being in the process of writing and then having to go back to the research point because you are missing something. Let me fill out a bit of that stuff. So as you see, I've like written down a bit. Some stuff that you can find on the speaking habits can also be part of the personality, like that she's a bit sarcastic or not the most formal person, Spock's rather colloquial. Stuff that could also be part of personality. Those two often are like intertwined with one another. So now that we have like characterized one character, we should find another character for them to talk to and support, and do the same for them, and then use the personality to find the topic that these two should be talking about, or like the personality of both to find what they should be talking about, what their positions on that topic is, how they're interacting with one another, and then use the speaking habits to actually fill the sentences with the way they would talk, and maybe have the speaking habits interact with the other person's personality, like when someone is not a fan of sarcasm, but Vika speaks very sarcastically to them, it would also be part of the dialogue that adds some depth to the conversation. So I'll just quickly do that for another character that I think they should interact with, and then we can go to the outline part. So now what we have, find the personality and speaking habits of a person, and also like a bit of their history and stuff about their character. Time to decide on stuff they're talking about. I will start by doing a little outline, written about their context. I think only doing C support would be probably enough. Their C support should be pretty short. I mean, Fire Emblem spots are not really much long. 500 to 1000 words. I know that's a big margin, but it also depends on what we're talking about, and most of the time the C support is the shortest. So we shouldn't talk about too many things that have to do with them. Also, considering where we're joining, this is also a moment where we could theoretically implement some game design or how the game is structured. In this point, they're joining pretty early, then leaving your army for a very long time and then rejoining. So this would be an option to say, hey, you have to do this support at the start of the game pretty much, and you can't do it at the end. You could also implement other things about them, like you have to reach X point in time, X people have to be alive, all that. I think, considering how they are in the game, that they're starting pretty early and then going to leave for a big moment, they have to have that conversation at the start of the game. That's like a little restriction. Restrictions are always good to make for yourself because they breed creativity, like Mackie has said in his book. Also something that many have found themselves in, like a sandbox game where they didn't know what to do, while when it's a story or survival game, they immediately had like plans and stuff they wanted to do. So here's like the little restriction we are putting on ourselves. So what could they be talking about? Like, we know from the games, these are friends, or rather he's like the leader of the anti-slave activist group that Vika is part of. She also calls him boss, so we could have just Tormod talk to her, since he's very outgoing and cheerful and is very comfortable around people like Vika. And just have, since that's the point in time where in the story they are meeting up with your big army, Tormod asks Vika about her opinion on the Dane army. You could go an entirely different route about how they should be talking about future plans for their movement or something. I just think this is like a pretty basic but neat idea to happen, especially since it is tied to, it has to happen early, because later on when they are joining, they are not part of your army, it's not the Dane army anymore, but like a big conglomeration of everything else. So this would be also a good moment where Vika can talk about her interaction with Micaiah. So we could just, since she has already interacted with Micaiah, talk about how Vika talks about how she met a friend already and stuff like that, or that she likes them because, like, as we know, your army is not very racist towards Laguz. So also we could say pretty happy overall. You could also go an entirely different route, but I think that since she herself doesn't really seem very negative towards them, and also in the story segments that are like official, she wasn't anywhere of like two-sided or anything. I think just having this conversation be pretty positive, and in general talk a bit about Vika and mentions her uncomfortability, I don't know if that's a word, okay, it seems like one, around Micaiah, since that was like a very important thing in their already existing talk. You could also go, and like I said, like this is just the way I want to do it and how it seems to me to make the most sense. But this is like pretty subjective, and there's not an objectively correct way of having VC support start. So yeah, after like defining the outline, the correct thing to do now is taking a break and maybe sleep a night over it and then look at the outline again. And if at that point in time you're happy with your outline and happy with how everything is going, you can start writing. Go into the process of writing this outline into the dialogue you want to have and want to take part. Okay, since we've slept over it and I'm happy with the outline, it is time to write the actual support. For that I set up a little Excel sheet. It has just one column for the talking person, one column for the expression that person will be having, and one column for the dialogue that is going to take place. And also this is pretty much box length. We shouldn't write our texts longer, because this is pretty much this is most you can fill a text box in. So we've already decided on Tormod approaching Vika, so maybe just do it with something like, hey Vika, how are you doing? It's pretty much fits to everything that Tormod's personality is based on, or like how his speaking habits fit, because well, hey Vika, he's always like pretty cheerful and talks much. Most of his sentences ended with an exclamation mark or a question mark. It's not very formal at all, so it just seems like something Tormod would say. Obviously, after every support that you've written, you should always sleep a night over and think, hey, does this seem like something he would write? Does this seem like something he would say? And if your answer is yes, then everything's cool. You can just keep the sentence. If not, well, I guess you should also overthink it, look at the sentence again, look at how he talked beforehand, analyze it, and then make any changes based on that. So now, time for Vika to answer. You should just simply say, oh, hi boss. I think just greeting her beforehand, because she's pretty informal herself, but she's still called some boss. He still has some authority over her. It's like my way of thinking when I'm thinking about how she should be talking. Also, in the way they have interacted, I just think that greeting him seems like the most probable thing, and just have short sentences. She wasn't really the one that talked for too long. I'm doing fine. Anything from me? Just have some normal interactions with one another. It wouldn't be weird for them to talk to one another since their relationship already. So just think some basic starts should be correct, and now it's time to actually fill it with the things that we wanted to talk about. We wanted to talk about him and ask him, hey, what does she think about the people in the Dane army? So probably when she's asking him, is there anything you need from me? Maybe this is a moment to mention that she and Mikaria talked to one another already, so have him be, yeah, I saw you talking to Mikaria earlier and wanted to check up on you. Question mark probably would be fitting here. How it been with the fall of the Dane army? Well, now thinking about it, it shouldn't be the Dane army. They're not the Dane army at that moment. You should always keep in mind at what position the people are in that story, and you shouldn't you should always try to just talk correctly, or like in the context correctly. Because otherwise, if it would be part of a story, it would be a bit unfitting. Because at the moment we weren't the Dane army, I think they were the Liberation army. As you can see, the text here is too long. Or the text box wouldn't fit, so we should just spread it out. I think doing it after the best, so that it would still look decent at text box. Filling text box is probably its entire own science. Just try to have these sentences still make sense and still somewhat readable if split to multiple text boxes, and try not to have a new text box just for one or two words. Probably the best way of saying. So this should probably be more of a curious question, or you should probably have a more curious expression, because he's like, yeah, he seems like, I don't know, that's something like a father would say when he saw his kid talking to another kid, and just being like, hey, how are you doing? I also think since most sentences here are still fitting into that speaking habits, that would still be fine. I think I'll now start and writing the rest of these reports so I can show you that. So now I've finished the dialogue. I've tried to put everything that we talked about in the outline in. I've have him mostly ask questions to her, talk to them about, make her talk to how they're talking, how she's doing and stuff. It's already also ending on a pretty happy note. How he is happy about how she's found friends. Her being a bit around, hey, I'm still feeling a bit weird around her, but I'm fine. I think those are like the most important things around the C support. I think I tried mostly looking at the speaking habits of both characters. I should sleep a night over it, which like you when you're writing your own supports, and then read it again and always rereading your sentences, always questioning yourselves. But this is basically everything you need to do for writing a Fire Emblem support yourself, and this would be like the first start. Obviously you now need to write B support, A support for other characters and stuff, but I think mostly just looking at the tips that I gave you right now and using this as like the blueprint, writing them your own. Let's summarize what we learned today. The games industry doesn't have a set formatting for its texts. You gotta create one for yourself that fits your work most. Dialogue in games is a very creative task, and while there isn't really an objective way of doing it correctly, there are still many sources of information to get better at it. If you want to work with or understand characters from others, you have to put in much research and deeply look into their personality and their speaking habits to create realistic texts. Lastly, if you want to implement the happenings of the game into your writing, look at what the game is giving you and create restrictions based on them. Keep in mind, I didn't teach you anything about how to implement your own support into Fire Emblem games, how voice acting works, or how you create your own characters and write stuff about them. You gotta learn this your own with the blueprints I've given you and with some work by yourself. But I hope this was helpful to you and you've learned lots from it.